Now is the time to silence your cell phones as to not disrupt the presentation. And thank you so much for supporting this free community program, which is supported in part by a grant from the Nantucket Cultural Council, a local agency, which is supported by the Mass Cultural Council, a state agency. Today we're very excited to have Dr. Gregory Skomal. He's an environmental analyst for the Massachusetts Shark Research Program of the Massachusetts Divisions of Marine Fisheries. What a title. For the past 25 years, this division has been studying the habits of more than a dozen species of coastal sharks that frequent the Commonwealth's waters. In 2009, Dr. Skomal began a white shark tagging program using electronic PSAT tags, making him and his team the first researchers to successfully tag sharks in the Atlantic Ocean. Today, we're going to find out what the PSAT tags reveal about white sharks in the water around Nantucket and learn what you need to know before enjoying the ocean this summer. Copies of his latest book, The Shark Handbook, which you see right over here, are available for purchase through our museum shop, and also he is willing to sign them after the presentation, so please stick around for that if you'd like to get that. And without any further ado, please welcome Dr. Gregory Skomal.
Thank you, Lindsay. I want to thank the Museum Historical Association for inviting me. It's great to be back in Nantucket. It's been a couple years. I was talking to Pete Howell, and I think of my last time here was perhaps when I gave the talk at the trustees and then the evening talk at the library I can't pronounce. Anthonium, right? Am I right? I've given lots of talks about white sharks the last few years. It seems to be a species that gets a lot of attention globally, and it's great giving these talks. I must say I've never given one underneath a whale before, so this is kind of exciting. It's good to come back to the museum. I think it's probably been a decade since I've been here, and it has been remodeled since the last time I was here, and it's certainly spectacular. I remember when this whale was up on the beach, and a couple of local fellows who I had been hanging out with helped cut it up, and I know they also ended up smelling for about 6 months after they did that. But it's good to be back here. I'm going to walk through what's been going on with our white shark research and the different technologies we are deploying on these animals for the very first time in this part of the world. This part of the world actually being the North Atlantic Ocean. Up until the last 4 years, we had never had predictable access to this species. It's a very elusive shark. As a scientist, I'm coming up on I'm actually my 30th year working on sharks, and I can tell you that if you had told me just 4 years ago that we'd be tagging white sharks with this technology and learning about their biology, I'd say that's absolutely crazy. There's no way. It's a shark we can't find in the Atlantic. It's one that we can't just go out and study. It's hard to raise money to study it because it's such an elusive animal, and that's why we know nothing about its biology. But one of the things we have been doing, the scientific community has been doing over the last many, many decades, is compiling information on its occurrence and its distribution in the Atlantic. So we go back to old data sets on the white shark, and this is what we get. And this is what we call white shark sightings data. And all white shark sightings data are really just confirmed locations of white sharks, and most of them are derived from fisheries interactions. So longliners, gill netters, recreational fishermen, harpooners who have encountered white sharks, and these data go back to the early 1800s. So this is basically a little over 500 data points that we have compiled over the last few decades that show us the distribution of this species. And you say, wow, that's a lot of points. But if I separate these points out by year, you could see that actually it's not. You know, some years there's no green points, other years you get 3 or 4. And that's because even though we know the distribution of this shark, which extends from the eastern Gulf of Mexico all the way up along the eastern seaboard, there's been no phenomenon that has acted to actually concentrate these animals. Nonetheless, since the early 80s when I started working on sharks, I have had the ability to go and actually encounter some of these animals as they've been brought into the docks by recreational and commercial fishermen. And some of these sharks are as small as newborn white sharks. Now, I'm not saying there's a lot of sharks I've been able to see. Probably in the last 30 years, maybe 6 to 8 dead ones. So it tells you there's just not a lot of them out there. You know, if we contrast that with the blue shark, I've probably seen hundreds, if not thousands, of those animals, just because they're so abundant. They're the most common large shark here in our part of the world. White shark, just a few. This is about the size they're born. And so when scientists go to investigate these animals, what we do is we do a methodical dissection, and we can learn about their basic life history, using, dissection techniques. So the most common, look at its stomach and figure out what it eats. Take a section of its backbone, and like a tree, the rings in the backbone tell you the age of the shark. So we can get a little bit of information, not only from these very small sharks, but also very, very big white sharks. And this is about an 18-footer that weighed 3,000 pounds that was harpooned in the early 80s and brought into the dock. So we can dissect that animal and get a sense of, the life history of it. But nonetheless, over time, we haven't been able to assemble or look at enough of these animals to figure out how they live in this part of the world. In other parts of the world, there are global hotspots for white sharks. California, South Africa, South Australia, Mexico, where not only you, as the average person, can go diving with these animals and take pictures, but scientists like myself have been studying them for decades. And much of what we know about these animals comes from one of these hotspots. Filmmakers take advantage of these hotspots as well. You turn on any of the shows during Shark Week that feature white sharks, by far 99% of them made over the 25 years of Shark Week have been filmed in one of these other places. There's one thing that these hotspots have in common, and that's food that looks like this. This is a group of animals that we call pinnipeds. Pinnipeds include the seals, the sea lions. One thing about white shark biology that we've learned over the years is that white sharks, as they get bigger, change their diet. Now, people do to a certain degree as well. So white sharks that are small feed almost predominantly on fish. Fish that live on or close to the bottom, schooling fish, maybe even dabbling into invertebrates like squid every now and then. And up until they're about 9 or 10 feet long, these white sharks have pointed teeth, like mako shark teeth, which clutch and grab onto schooling and swimming fish. Once they get to be about 9, 10 feet long, their body shape becomes more robust. They get mass, they get girth. They have tremendous amount of power and size and speed. And their tooth shape changes from this sharply pointed mako tooth to a serrated triangular cutting tool. And it's about that time in their lifetime where they move into a different diet, and that diet is dominated by marine mammals. Pinnipeds like seals and sea lions, dead whales, scavenging dead whales, dolphins, porpoises. These larger food items can be exploited by these big sharks because they have the ability to attack and kill. And it's that kind of change in diet that also brings these white sharks in close to these high densities of seal colonies. So I think you know where I'm going with this particular talk. And you don't need a PhD to figure it out. So what do we have going on here in New England that suddenly makes it so easy for us to go out, and I say easy, but on a relative scale, to go out and tag these sharks? And that's a changing gray seal population. And if you live on Nantucket or around Cape Cod, you know what a gray seal looks like. It's a big seal. I think the largest they get is up to 800 pounds, 8-9 feet long, dominant marine mammal, aside from the whales, that associates close to shore here in New England. What's interesting, when I started studying white sharks, I realized that I really needed to figure out what their prey were doing. And I really do think that the white sharks are here because of their prey, the gray seal. So I went back to scan the literature, and it's remarkable how little we know about this species in terms of biology. But there are records, and there are archaeological data that tell us that the gray seal was once very, very abundant species. If you look at that map up there in the far left-hand corner, you will see that there's a whole bunch of crosses. Each one of those crosses represents a historical archaeological site where people have excavated and found the remains of gray seals. These remains date back to quite literally tens of thousands of years. And it turns out by the end of the 17th century, and I thought this was pretty fascinating, what was once a robust population of gray seals along the eastern seaboard as far south as New York, population had been actually wiped out by Native Americans and then the early settlers, and then kept depressed right up until the 60s and into the early 70s by bounty programs. So what was once breeding colonies here in the Northeast were removed, and the population, which was thought to be quite robust, was diminished down to what was probably on the order of 5 to 10,000 animals, all living on a very remote island off the coast of Canada called Sable Island, which is remote and not easy for people to get to. In 1972 came the infamous Marine Mammal Protection Act, which included the protection of pinnipeds, seals, gray seals, you name it, harbor seals. All seals were protected. So over the course of the last 40 years, that remnant population of gray seals on Sable Island has been allowed to expand and repopulate, and more importantly, recolonize parts of the northeastern U.S. and Canada. So the largest breeding colony that now exists in the United States is Muskeget Island. We all know where Muskeget is, living here in Nantucket. And Muskeget has pups born there every year. And if we look at the number of pups born there, it gives you a really great index of abundance. The changes that we're seeing in gray seal populations and recovery. 1991, 3 or 4 pups were born on Muskeget. In 2008, over 2,000 pups born on Muskeget. So that gives you a sense of the dramatic growth in this population that we're seeing. And of course, if you spend any time on or about the water here in Nantucket or anywhere off the Cape Cod area, you will see lots and lots of gray seals as this species repopulates and recolonizes these areas. So what happens? If you open the cafe, there will be a response from those that like to eat there. And the ones that like to eat there, of course, are white sharks. So if we go back to our little green dots that I showed you in my first slide, and I only isolate those dots relative to Cape Cod from 99 to 2012, and I plot out the numbers of those dots, over time you could see that, okay, from 1990 to 2003, 2004, there were just a handful of white sharks, confirmed white sharks sighted in the Cape Cod area. But now we see this dramatic growth since 2004. And coupled with that growth are the number of seals that we're seeing that show evidence of being attacked by white sharks. So this is a simple cause and effect. What you have is a response of the white shark population to this growing gray seal recolonization in this area. I can't tell you how many gray seals are out here. Those data are being compiled, but for those of you who spend on the water, you know it's not 5, you know it's not 50. It's more on the order of probably 5 to 15,000 in this region alone. And when you have that kind of biomass that a shark likes to target, you will see a response by those sharks to move in to take advantage of it. And that's exactly what we're seeing. And if we plot out where all these little green dots are in the Cape Cod area, and we just isolate it to the eastern shore of Cape Cod, you could see that the red dots represent where these white sharks are, and they're certainly concentrated around where these seal haul-outs are. We can also show Great Point, which of course has very large seal haul-out for gray seals, and we have evidence of white sharks occurring there as well. What do these seal attacks look like? Well, they're not pleasant to look at, and there's only one animal that can actually do this to a gray seal. If you're not a gray seal fan, you're probably not going to mind these photos, but if you are, you can see that this is exactly what it looks like when a white shark dispatches a gray seal. That in the left-hand side is the gray seal pup that was actually pulled from the stomach of a white shark. And that to me is really direct evidence of this feeding interaction. Up in the right-hand corner, you see the results of an attack on a large adult male gray seal. No other animal can do this to a gray seal. And then we have direct evidence again in the lower right-hand corner. This was photos taken by a family that were rounding Monomoy and noticed this white shark literally feeding on a gray seal. So we've got this cause and effect that's going on, and what it has resulted in is the ability for us now as scientists to go out and predictably encounter, during the summer months, white sharks off of Cape Cod. And in doing so, we've been able now to tag 34 of these animals over the course of the last 4 summers. And we've used a variety of technologies, and each one of these technologies tells us a little bit different information about the biology of the animal. Some of the technology, like acoustic tags, tells us when the sharks are around Cape Cod, Nantucket, the vineyard. Pop-up satellite tags, they tell us where the sharks go when they leave here and how they spend their time in three-dimensional space. Real-time satellite tags give us high-resolution data that cover all kinds of spatial and temporal scales. Where are the sharks around Nantucket, and where are they around Florida in almost real time? And what real-time satellite tags also let you people do is follow along with the discovery. which is pretty exciting. So I'm going to walk through each one of these tags. And the little yellow dots you see here are all the white sharks we've tagged off of Monomoy, Chatham, Orleans over the course of the last 4 years. So you can see where they're concentrated. And again, it makes perfect sense. It's where the seals are. You know, I still have members of the media, with all due respect, asking me, well, why do we think the sharks are here? Now, we use a couple different techniques, and it depends on the technology, but by far, most of the sharks that we've tagged, we utilize a harpoon tagging technique. We're the only folks in the world to actually do this. And using a traditional New England harpoon vessel, which is designed to tag bluefin tuna these days, meaning it has a very long pulpit, a very high tower, and a spotter plane, we're able to actually sneak up on these sharks and tag them. That way, they're free swimming. We're not grabbing a hold of them. We're not risking our crew. We're not risking the shark's life. And we're able to tag them while they're just moving along, acting naturally. Of course, we spook the shark when we do this, you know. And I always, you know, people ask me, well, does it hurt the shark, and what's it like for the shark? And I say to them, well, it'd be like somebody running up to you and piercing your ear. It doesn't really hurt, but it would really scare the hell out of you. And it would make you run away. And a lot of these sharks do take off right after we tag them. And the way the technique works is we have the tagger on the end of a 20-foot-long pulpit. We use a spotter plane to get us close to the sharks that are swimming in shallow water as they're hunting around Monomoy. And most of this is around Monomoy, as you can see from the previous slide. And we're able to actually get the tagger over the shark before it knows we're there. It can hear the boat, but it can't feel the boat, so it's not spooked. We tag the shark with a modified harpoon, so we're not actually going up and driving one of these implements into a shark. We've taken the traditional harpoon and modified it into a very benign tagging pole. And the reason I use a professional harpooner to do this is because we don't want to hurt the shark. You know, you put Greg Skomal, I've tagged thousands of, well, almost 1,000 sharks in my lifetime, but I never really throw the tagging pole. So I want somebody who knows how to do that. Because we have to hit the shark at the base of the dorsal fin because we don't want to hurt it. You know, if I get on the pulpit, I'm going to tag it in the head and it's going to die and we're not going to learn anything about it. Not that that's likely to happen, but I'm not taking those chances. So the acoustic tags that we're using are great because they're relatively inexpensive, and relatively inexpensive means $500. All right, so we put a $500 tag on the shark and it lasts for about 5 years, which really gets bang for your buck. And these tags give us a sense of what the sharks are doing close to shore when they're around Cape Cod and the islands. All they do is emit a very high-frequency ping. But in order for us to hear that ping, we need to put a receiver in the water. So what we've done is wired up areas around the Cape and islands to where these sharks are spending their time to see if we can figure out, you know, where they're spending their time and when they're in there. So this is a shark called Julia. And we tagged Julia in 2011. She came back in 2012. We snuck up on her, and we put I put a camera down into the water. There is our, that's my face. There's our spotter plane. Here's Billy Chapralis on the Easy Does It on the pulpit getting ready to tag Julia. And we don't know at this time yet whether Julia already has a tag. So you'll see her shadow as we come in tight to Orleans, where she's prowling at about 10 feet of water. And I'm going to take this camera and I'm just going to jam it in the water. This is one of those little GoPro cameras. Very, very simple, high-definition video. And you're going to get a look at Julia as she's hunting in tight to the beach. And as we come up on the right side of her, you'll see this acoustic tag. And we learn at that moment, by putting a receiver in the water, that it is indeed Julia, and we tagged her the year before. So it immediately tells us that sharks are coming back to the very same area where we tagged them. And there you can see the tag down just at the base of the dorsal fin on the body of this shark. And what's beautiful is we can look at the individual behaviors of Julia because those tags are coded individually. But our information is only as good as our receiver coverage. We have only one receiver in the water off a swimming beach. We can tell whether or not the shark goes to that swimming beach, but we can't tell where it's going when it's not there. So we've wired up, and you can see her just cruising off the bottom there as she hunts in shallow water. And I think that's exactly what she's doing. She's hunting, looking for seals. So if you look at the left side here, you'll see a map of Cape and the islands and a bunch of little dots. Each one of those dots represents a receiver. So we've wired up areas as best we can. Because every time you put gear in the water, you've got to tend to that gear, you've got to maintain that gear, and that comes with a price. We've got almost 30 receivers out just off of Orleans and Chatham right now. We've got other receivers out for other studies on codfish and striped bass to the north. You know, they're color-coded in yellows and greens and darker blues here. You can see one at Great Point where we actually never detected a single white shark that we tagged. And we put out 26 of our tags. And to give you a sense of the kinds of data we get from these tags, and that's what the receivers look like. And then we have to go out and we have to pull these receivers and we have to download the data to get a sense of what we're learning about these animals. But what we can get a sense of is when the sharks arrive, how long are they staying there, when do they leave, and when they're there, where are they spending their time? Then we can look at those data and say, okay, where are they at night versus day, high tide versus low tide? We can start to look for patterns in behavior. And one of the things that emerged is I'm seeing very different behaviors depending on the fish. So we go back to my girlfriend Julia here, and we add another shark, large marge. Large marge is in red, and Julia is in yellow. And each one of these dots represents where we have a receiver, but the size of the dot is proportional to how much time they spend there. So big dots represent areas they like to be in. So if we look at large marge, we can see the big red dots off of Nauset, and basically from Chatham Inlet to the north. So she seems to have a neighborhood that's very, very different from Julia, who's to the south, where she spends a lot of her time in an area where we call Shark Cove, that you see there where the old Southway used to be. And funny, they don't overlap much. And even when Julia decides to go north, she cuts through Marge's neighborhood before moving up to Truro, where Marge never goes. So here we're seeing some kind of a territoriality and a social hierarchy that might be developing with these sharks that come into the areas around Cape Cod. And remarkably, although we have 23 transmitters out on white sharks, we've not had no detections on our Great Point receiver, which I think is very, very interesting because we have had observations of sharks there from some of your local charter captains, in addition to very, very obvious attacks on seals. So perhaps there's a shark that likes Great Point that doesn't mingle with the other sharks. But we're seeing, this is just an example of the kinds of data we can get from acoustic tags. Now, we talked a little bit about pop-up satellite tags as being the kind of tag that gives us more broad-scale information. The way these tags work is you put them on the shark, and they measure depth and light levels and temperature, and they act as data loggers. They just archive these data. And then at a time programmed by us, they actually pop off the shark, float to the surface, and then transmit those data to a satellite, which then the satellite company then emails them to me, and I do a retrospective analysis that gives me the three-dimensional movements of the animal after the tag comes off. So if I tag, this particular shark I've photographed here is the one that was trapped in a salt pond around Woods Hole, actually on Noshawn Island back in 2004. You know, this is a $5,000 tag, and in this particular case, it malfunctioned. And all we learned from this shark was the fact that it stayed in a salt pond for 2 weeks. So the way this tag works is I had put it on the shark in September of 2004, and I programmed it to come up in April of 2005. So we don't learn anything about the shark until after that tag comes up. So what have we learned? We've tagged 15 sharks with these pop-up satellite tags. All right, I'm going to show you data from 10 of them because we're still analyzing. A couple of these sharks are still swimming around, and we're analyzing data that has just recently come in. So 9 of these sharks show a very simple migratory pattern. And each one of these dots represents where one of these sharks was in time, because in time is color-coded. So the green dots represent September, and as we lighten up, we get into October, and by the time we're into November, we're talking yellow, and then we get down into orange, we're into January, February, and these brighter colors are winter months. And we can see that there's a migration here that's very, very, very simple. It's one we typically see in a lot of coastal sharks. It's north-south. You know, this is the snowbird migration. You know, you spend time on Cape Cod and the islands in the summertime, and then in the winter you go to Florida. Much different than I anticipated because sharks in other parts of the world, namely white sharks, move great, great distances offshore in the off months. They don't just go to Florida. And you can see here a couple of different areas where there's high densities. Like off of Cape Cod, you can see that's where they seem to spend a lot of time. And when they're down off of Florida and Georgia, they pile up there. So there seems to be clear summer-winter habitat and a very simple coastal migration. And because the sharks are spending most of their time on the continental shelf, when we look at the depth data from the tags, they're only going, and that's in meters, they're only going every day between 100 and 150 feet deep between the surface and the bottom of the shelf. So they're coastal oriented. This is one shark, give you a sense of the temperatures in which they end and the depths in which they're diving. Shallow water animals, very simple migration, staying in water that's largely 59 to 67 degrees. Not a complex migratory pattern, so I'm done, right? I've got 9 fish that are doing this, and I'm going to run the press. I'm going to be the guy that describes the simple coastal migratory pattern of the white shark in the Atlantic, right? No, wrong. Along came Curly. And we tagged Curly in 2010. And Curly is a very charismatic shark because she became the subject of, the central focus of a film we did with Discovery in 2010. Curly is a smiler, smiles for the camera, as you can see here. She was a bit of a ham during the film, and we had quite a bit of time together, Curly and I. We actually chartered a vessel out of Nantucket here during the Starfish. J-Star and his crew helped us with this particular adventure. Curly was a shark that we discovered feeding 9 miles off the coast of Chatham, feeding on a dead humpback whale. And to give you a sense of Curly's size, and if you know Jay's boat, you get a really good idea of the fact that she's almost 17 feet long. She's a mature female shark, and she was there really just to scavenge and eat this dead humpback whale. Of course, we're making a film for Discovery, and we're also interested in tagging her with a new technology that we'd hope would give us real-time observations as to where this shark would be, so that we can go online and figure out what she's doing with greater resolution data. So we spent the day with her, and we got to photograph her up close and personal. And Discovery loved it because all of the stuff we had shot in 2010 was basically a gray shadow under a pulpit that would take off when we tagged it. And if you've watched Discovery Channel and Shark Week in particular, they need these flamboyant shots of white sharks so they can scare the heck out of the viewing public. So we tagged her with one of these, what we call spot tags. And because we couldn't catch the shark and actually affix the tag to her dorsal fin at the very highest point, and for these tags to work, they need to be at the surface, we put a little boat on her. And this was a $6,000 tag, and much of the work that we did in 2010 was financed by Discovery, so I thank them for all they did for us that summer. But we never heard from Curly again using that technology. In other words, my great ambition of following where Curly went when she left New England immediately fizzled when we stopped hearing from her after the first day. And of course, if you watch the film, it looks like I'm worried about her being dead. And of course, I wasn't. That was just the narrator and the producer and the script writer. And there's a bunch of scenes in the film where we get in the water with the white shark and we take photos of Curly, and here she is towing her fancy tag. But the beauty of this tag is it also doubles as a pop-up satellite tag. So we did eventually hear from her on April 2nd of 2011. And Curly did something very, very, very different. Her behavior was not coastal, was not snowbird migratory pattern. She stayed around most of the Cape Cod area for August and September before moving out to the edge of the continental shelf at the canyons south of Long Island and New England, southern New England. She spent all of December into January at the edge of the canyons, the edge of the Gulf Stream, before crossing the Gulf Stream and moving down into part of the world, part of the Atlantic we call the Sargasso Sea. Sargasso Sea is a well-defined area east of, no, I think it's a poorly defined area east of the Gulf Stream. We don't know a lot about it, but we know that Curly went to the Sargasso where she spent February and March before heading inshore toward the edge of the shelf toward Georgia, where she popped up about 150 miles off the coast of Georgia. Now, Curly clearly did something very, very different from all the other sharks. So it means I had to go back to the drawing board and figure out how do I incorporate Curly into this wonderful snowbird migratory pattern when that's exactly what she did not do. And if we look at the depth data of Curly, I used the same scale as the other figures so you could see how dramatic it is. She also, when she was on the edge of the shelf, only moved down to about 200 feet every day between the surface and the bottom, staying in relatively temperate water. But when she left the shelf and moved down off the coast into the Sargasso, she started diving to depths as great as 800 meters, which is more than 2,500 feet every day. So he's got this diving pattern down into water that's as cold as 35, 36 degrees, moving to the surface in water as warm as 80 degrees. So here's a very, very different pattern, something much more similar to what we see the sharks in the Pacific Ocean doing. Now, I have no idea, because your question is, okay, what is she doing? Why is she diving to that depth? She's spending a heck of a lot of time to get there. But, so she's obviously expending a lot of energy, but there's got to be some energetic payback. She's got to gain something by doing it. So she's obviously, in my mind, exploiting some sort of food resource down there. It's clearly not seals, it's not whales, it's not dolphins, it's at depth. And so the next big thing for us is to figure out how to go study what's going on in the Sargasso Sea. But our quest continued to try to put a tag on a shark that would give us real-time movement data. And there's this group of fishermen called the OSearch that have been donating their time and services to marine scientists all over the world to tag big fish. And they've tagged white sharks, tiger sharks, hammerheads all over the world using a method where they're actually able to catch the shark, lift it out of the water, and provide direct access to researchers to sample those sharks. And here you could see, so in 2012, September of 2012, we used the OSearch. We partnered with the OSearch off of Monomoy, and we tagged 2 sharks, Mary Lee and Jeanne, with this technology. And here you could see Mary Lee out of the water in the lower left-hand corner. You could see 2 tags on her dorsal fin. One of them is an accelerometer. That's the orange tag. That gives us very fine scale data on her movements. And the top tag, mounted very, very high, is what we call that spot tag. That's a tag that transmits in real time. So these guys use a lift system. So this next video I'm going to show you moves quickly, but it shows you the technique that these guys deploy on these fish. You see the lift being put down in the water. That's Mary Lee before we caught her. They use a hook about the size of my arm, so the shark does not swallow it. It's got no barb. Now they're just hand-lining this shark and walking it like a dog to the big boat. And there you can see the lift. That lift's going down in the water. That gentleman's going to pull that shark toward him. I don't know why anyone would want to do that. And there's Mary Lee being lifted right out of the water. Immediately, hoses go in her mouth so she does not die. Drowning to a shark would be out of water. So we irrigate her gills, we cover her eyes, and we hop on board and do everything from take blood to put tags on her, to take parasite samples, tissue samples. We even did an ultrasound to determine if she was pregnant. And we let her go. All done within 12 to 15 minutes. Has anyone seen Mary Lee's movements since we tagged her? Remarkable stuff. You can go online to osearch.org and you can see that Mary Lee did this. Mary Lee, you could see where she is today. And this is about a week old, this slide. But if you go to the shark tracker at osearch.org, you can see high-resolution movements of her movement patterns. And you can see she did things that, we didn't anticipate. Obviously went down to the southeastern U.S. to our wonderful snowbird migratory pattern before moving up north again in January, where she went to George's Bank in January. I know fishermen that don't want to go there. She then took a flight to Bermuda, spent time in the Sargasso Sea like Curly before moving up now the edge of the shelf off of New Jersey. So this gives us very high-resolution, broad-scale data. And since then, we've tagged another shark, Lydia, which you can see online as well. I'm going to close out the talk with a new technology that we explored as well in 2012. I partnered with my colleagues at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, and my friends at Discovery came back and wrote a bunch of big checks for us as well to do this research. You see that these sharks are going to places that we can't easily go to. I'm thinking the Sargasso Sea. A lot of people ask me, what are they doing at 2,000 feet deep? Well, we started getting the idea of what if we can't go there without spending a lot of money on research vessels and a lot of money on deep sea submersibles. And we're still not going to be able to find or follow the shark doing that. There's a technology that Woods Hole Oceanographic has developed called AUV technology, Autonomous Underwater Vehicle, which is just 3 fancy words that mean robot. They have invented a whole bunch of these robots, and they send them on missions from mapping bottom habitat to finding things like shipwrecks, Titanic, airliners that go down. This is amazing technology, most of which was financed by the Navy. So you can imagine what else they do. These are what these vehicles look like. You basically send them on a mission and they do the mission. Now, they've never been used to follow a marine animal. And in order to follow a marine animal, this is what an AUV looks like. Looks like a torpedo. In order to follow a marine animal, it needs to follow a transponder. So we had to modify the AUV, and we modified it for Discovery by changing its software configuration and adding a whole bunch of camera systems, very simple cameras. And then we devised and modified the transponder, which actually will go on the shark. If we could put the transponder on the shark, the AUV will follow the transponder, which will lead us to the shark, and we'll be able to actually follow the shark using a robot. And while we're following the shark, the AUV will also measure some of the most simplest of oceanographic parameters like temperature, but also current profiles, dissolved oxygen. So in essence, we can get a sense of where the animal is, high-resolution data, and model the habitat in which it's swimming. And if we can deploy this over long term, which is years away, by the way, but if we can just show that this concept can work, we can apply it long term and actually follow sharks to places that we can't go. So we tried this, and it worked on 4 different sharks, one of which was large marge. And here's large marge right there, holding the transponder affixed to her dorsal fin. So this transponder is orange, it's tethered to her, and on the right side you see the tracks of 4 sharks that we tracked that over the course of 2012, working with Woods Hole Oceanographic and Discovery Channel. Now, one of the things we wanted to do was, of course, because Discovery was involved, they wanted that footage of the sharks, and they were thinking we would film these sharks attacking seals. And of course, I didn't even think we'd be able to track the sharks, so I just said, yes, of course, we can do that, we can do that. You know, that's all you do when, you know, you just yes them to death, hoping they're gonna, you know, bring out the checkbook. And they did. They did a great job. And what large marge's track is the green one here. And it's about a 4-hour track. And you can see after we tagged her to the south, not far from Nauset Inlet, she moved, the North Inlet, and then she moved offshore in this big loop before heading back inshore and literally swimming right along the beach up to Coast Guard Beach in Orleans. So here's a photograph of large marge being followed by the AUV. And the funny part about this particular photo is the fact that we didn't know it until recently, but some of you might remember a kayaker being followed by a shark off of Orleans. It turns out, after we finally got a hold of high-resolution photos from that photographer, based on the structure of a dorsal fin, that was large marge. Large marge likes Orleans, and large marge is very curious. So large marge followed the kayaker that day, producing an amazing photograph for the Cape Cod Times and for the rest of the global community to admire. So we decided to get large marge back by following her. And that's exactly what you can see here, the AUV following her. So this next footage I'm going to show you is shot by the AUV, and it's a segment of the film that's going to air in 2013, July or August of 2013. But this is just a very simple 3-dimensional example of color-coded by depth, with blue being deep water right up to maroon being land, how we can then model the 3-dimensional movements of this animal based on the track by the AUV. And this is a very simple 3-dimensional model just looking at depth. But imagine if we compare multiple oceanographic conditions that give us a sense of what these animals, what they want to be in terms of their habitat, so they can predict where they might be and where they won't be. You know, one of the things that we hear a lot is, and I see a lot, is we never see these sharks in Nantucket Sound. And I think it's driven by temperature. You know, once we have a good handle on what their temperature requirements are, we can then test hypotheses on why they're not in Nantucket Sound. So it's an example of how this works. So I'm going to show you this footage and give you a sense of the hype associated with making a film.
I see him.
In addition
You got
to
a visual on him right here.
the technologies. Here's Billy tagging large marge.
It's on! It's on! It's on, baby!
Nice work.
It's very exciting
Yeah,
to do this
that's all
stuff.
of 17, 18
As you
feet.
can imagine.
That's a big
She's
animal.
actually about 16
Big
feet.
animal. It's towing that tag perfectly. Just the way we want it.
And here's the AUV being put in the water. Now, the transponder is designed so that we could send a signal to it and it'll come right off. We don't want the shark dragging around this big transponder, and we certainly don't want to lose that transponder because it's very valuable. So we send an electronic signal to it, and we can go ahead and follow. We can go get that transponder back, which worked flawlessly. So what we're doing is we have the AUV.
Sharks moving north, right along the beach.
Oh, be quiet.
Got a fleet of
We
boats
have the
fishing
AUV.
striped bass
Guy
over
never
here.
knows when to stop talking. So look at this. This is the AUV going through a school of. Who remembers that striped bass fleet fishing hard off of Orleans? That's that school.
We're tightening it up. I got it good
So
now.
we're tracking the AUV, tracking the shark. And there you can see the AUV. That's Greg Packard from Woods Hole. He's communicating with the AUV. This is the view from the AUV.
The vehicle will stay high until it gets within a closer distance to the shark, and then it will come down and match the shark's depth.
Shark's dead ahead of us. Shark's at 2 o'clock.
Got it. Got it again.
2 meters. Shark should be up. Shark should be up. You may be able to see it, Nick.
There she is. Marge, named after the captain's wife,
Where
I
are
might
the
add.
guys?
By the captain.
Go get it.
Makes a difference. Here's a view from the AUV. As it
Closing on
approaches.
it. Closing on it.
Here
comes the sun. Yeah. Go get it. Go at it. Come on. Keep going. Keep going. Go. Don't give up.
There's the transponder.
Look at that. Keep going, buddy. Keep going.
This is really just proof of concept. Can you get a robot to track an animal? Now, I'm thinking Large Marge is not going to be too kind to this thing. You know, and the engineers weren't too happy about what I thought might happen. Especially after that happened.
We're getting closer and closer
But
to shore here.
she turned around and followed the AUV for about 5 minutes and then went about her merry way. She didn't harm it at all, and I thought she might take it apart.
But it's obviously moving in
So
very
one of the things we learned from the AUV, not only the fact that we could do it, we could prove the concept, and now all we have to do is take it to the next level and modify the software to the extent that now we can, change the behavior of the AUV when it's close proximity. But we also need to start thinking about technology that will allow for long-term deployments. And so we're working on that. But one of the observations that we got from the AUV is this. And here you can see her 5 gill slits and a bunch of puncture wounds, not only just aft of the gill slits, but also on her pectoral fin here. Those are bite marks. And the fact that they're white at the bottom there, you can see those white, that means they're relatively fresh. And this would be produced by a male trying to mate with a female. So that tells us that if not around Cape Cod, very close to Cape Cod, this might be an area where white sharks are actually mating. And that's really the only evidence that we have of that. So it turns out this area might be a mating area for the breeding area for the white shark. So I am going to end with a couple of things. Most of everything all of everything I've showed you is covered by grants that we've brought in and donations that we've brought in to do this research. Although I work for a state agency, none of the state's resources are used, for the most part, except for salary, to do this work. You may have heard on the radio today that we've been partnering with Atlantic White Shark Conservancy, a brand new nonprofit. They are establishing a license plate for the white shark aficionados in New England, in Massachusetts, who are super interested in white sharks, and there are quite a few of those people out there. So you can get a white shark plate now, and if you're not a big white shark fan but like striped bass and bluefish, we threw them on the plate as well. I'd like to thank all the people that have contributed, from Discovery Channel to our tagging crew to harbor masters to private individuals who have donated considerable money to get this work done. And again, as Lindsay said, my book is here. I'm happy to sign it for you, which of course will diminish its value, but I'll do it anyway. And I'll entertain any questions because I actually think we have time. Thank you very much.
Most fish, the females are larger than the males, and it looks like most of the great whites you've tagged are females. Is that the case?
Yeah, one of our problems with the harpoon tagging technique is we're tagging from above, and the shark leaves almost immediately or takes off, most of the sharks. So we can't sex them. In other words, we don't know whether they're male or female. So,
see, yeah.
only about half the sharks we've been able to sex, and 92% of them have been female.
But,
So
but the females are the larger ones.
females do get larger. So if the white shark population, if it's driven, if feeding ecology is driven by size, as we think it is, bigger white sharks feeding on seals, it might make sense that that's dominated by females. But with those mating scars and the fact that I do know of 2 males that we did tag, there are a few mature males hanging around, trying to figure all that out. But, yeah.
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah, fine with me.
They go down, most of the sharks, it looks like, are down around Jacksonville or southern Georgia. Now, there aren't any seals around there, are there? Or are
No.
there?
No, there are not. There's no pinnipeds down there. And to keep this talk shorter than my average 1 hour long talk that would put you to sleep, I've pulled some of the data out. But I do have a graphic, trying to hypothesize what's going on in each area. And we think that up north here we got the seals and dead whales, and there's plenty of them. Down south we don't have the seals, but we do have whales, and we have dead whales. North Atlantic right whale migrates to this area. It's a designated calving area. We have evidence not only of white sharks scavenging dead right whales, but we also have very strong evidence of them attacking newborn calves. So I think they're hardwired to go down as part of that migratory pattern of North Atlantic right whales, but I don't think they survive on that. One thing I learned in Jacksonville a couple of months ago was we caught a white shark in an area where there was nothing but hundreds of dolphins. And we know we've pulled the remains of dolphins out of white sharks before, so I think the dolphins are also critically important food resource for white sharks. So those would be the marine mammals that dominate those areas.
Greg, the Orleans kayaker,
Yeah,
press reported upon closer examination this fast.
right. Yeah. Yes, that would be my twin brother. He misidentified that fish. No, I will absolutely take responsibility for that. We had interviewed all the people present, and we looked at the photographer would only give us a low-res version of that photo. So we couldn't do any analysis on the photo, and we actually had some video footage where the behavior of this shark more closely mimicked that of a basking shark, which have also been known to check out floating objects. So our message to the media was, it's either a white shark or a basking shark, and we can't be sure on either one, but it's possible that it was a basking shark as well. That got translated in, Skomal thinks it's a basking shark. Of course, the photographer finally gave us the high-res copy of the photo in September, long after the fact, and we were able to then compare it to large marge and the very distinctive dorsal fin. But yeah, I will take responsibility for that, for adding basking shark to the mix on that one. Very good, Pete. Thank you.
Greg, two questions.
George, yeah.
What is the power source in that AUV?
It is batteries. It is batteries.
So that would be your limitation on how far that
It
can
is
go.
absolutely. The batteries in that particular AUV only last about 12 hours.
Yeah.
So we would have to figure out a way of recharging them, which is possible through passive methods or active methods. Going to some kind of glider technology. Right now we're talking short-term deployments. But, for us and for Discovery and Hui, it was basically, let's get proof of concept, build on that, and then raise the money to try to take it to the next level.
The other thing you already answered when I went south in October, right in that Savannah, Georgia, Jacksonville area is the right whale breeding grounds. And that's what we did see him.
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely.
Great job.
Thanks a lot, George. Great to see you.
Two quick questions. The Sargasso Sea, is there any thought that going deep might be for giant squid or?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. There are people who are convinced that the reason these sharks make these oceanic phase trips, either in the Pacific Ocean, is to exploit giant squid resources, much like sperm whales do. That's entirely plausible. Again, when I think about giant squid, I think in terms of, there not being, hundreds of them in an area or thousands of them in an area that make it worthwhile. But perhaps feeding on one giant squid over the course of a month is enough for the shark. There's a bunch of bioenergetic studies that have looked at white sharks to figure out how much does it need to eat. And early results indicated that they probably, like one belly full of whale blubber would last them for 30 to 60 days. Which means that, okay, go to an area, and if you find a food resource over the course of 2 months, you're okay. You only have to eat every now and then. But a more recent study done in the last month that was just published, and again, all these studies stand on shaky ground because they make big assumptions about caloric value and, metabolic rate, say that no, they have to eat more frequently. And that's why they stay in areas like seal colonies over the course of months so they can exploit as many seals as possible and bulk up. So we don't know what those energetic rates, somewhere in between, I'm sure. But perhaps, now we also know there's over 10,000 humpback whales that are returning from the Caribbean that go right through the Sargasso into it's past Bermuda. So maybe there's a lot going on where the shark's options are everything from a dead humpback, a newborn humpback, to deep water resources like giant squid, or some of these mesopelagic fishes that might be in high densities. But for me, it'd be great to do a Sargasso research trip. Maybe bring a couple AUVs, maybe a submersible, maybe, and get down there in March. I think that'd be fun.
Then quickly, I noticed last fall, I guess it was Jeanne, got tagged and sort of made a beeline off of Sconset, was
Yeah.
going back and forth for a week, and then it stopped. Is there any speculation?
Yeah, we've got data, and again, it's one of these slides I pulled out, and I apologize, but it was, the slide shows that Jeanne it's a testament to the fact that each one of these individuals, we think in terms of what striped bass do, what bluefish do, how do we go about getting lobsters? They have these general patterns. With these sharks, these white sharks, we're seeing individual patterns like Julia and Large March. The same thing with Jeanne versus Mary Lee. When we look at the data that we put these accelerometers on tags, and the accelerometer gives us really fine scale behavioral data for the first day. And then they pop off and we go get them. And right from the get-go, we could see that Jeanne spent most, if not all of her time hugging the bottom for that first 24 hours, whereas Mary Lee was one of these sharks that moved between the surface and the bottom extremely frequently. So based on those data, it looks like right from the get-go we're dealing with two different personalities. We got a bottom hugger and we have a surface hugger. And that was borne out in the accelerometer data. So we're seeing these broad differences. And now Lydia, we tagged in Jacksonville, her behavioral data right in the beginning was very similar to that of Mary Lee's. And we're seeing Lydia quite a bit now. Lydia is almost to Bermuda at this point. So she's reversing what Mary Lee did. She's heading north the other route. She's going to catch a flight in Bermuda. The mic is over there.
As somebody who does a lot of surfing off the South Shore, where I put on a lot of black neoprene and go flop around in the water in close proximity with seals pretty frequently. Basically, do you have any advice? I'm really attached to my legs. I like that.
I don't know if I have any advice. This is a loaded question, right? I'm damned if I do and damned if I don't here. I don't study shark attack because I'd probably go out of business. But the bottom line is, for those people who do, they're basically like they're numbers crunchers. All you can do, it's like studying, it's like working for an insurance company and figuring out the probability of a car accident in Massachusetts. And the same thing happens with people who study shark attack. And when you look at the statistics and you look at probabilities, and you've heard them all. The likelihood of an attack on a human being by a white shark in Massachusetts is incredibly low. So that would tell you, okay, I can go surfing here because we've been doing that for decades. But we're seeing changes now, aren't we? We're seeing more white sharks. We're not seeing a lot around Nantucket. They have been here. I've got reports going. My green dots go all around Nantucket, to the south and to the east and west, not to the north. But we do have the presence of these animals. Again, it's one of these common sense deals. I think the sharks are paying particular attention to areas where there's high densities, predictable densities of seals. So Monomoy is an obvious spot where you get a pile of 100 to 500 or 1,000 seals on the beach every day. So a white shark's going to do that. You know, if you're in your house, you're not going to go to your living room to find a meal. You're going to go to your kitchen. So you got to find out where the kitchens are. And that's what we're trying to do with these acoustic tags. In an ideal world, what I would do is wire up receivers all over the state of Massachusetts, but I don't have the funding or the manpower to do that. And I'd find out where the sharks are. You know, where are you spending your time? Where are you visiting? So, you know, if you've got a seal haul out in a spot where you are consistent, you know, if the seals are just swimming by, and there's one here, there's one there, you're probably fine. If you've got 200, notice the probably part, you got 200 or 500 seals on the beach every day there where you're surfing, and there's a channel that allows access to those animals for a white shark, you know, you might want to look around, find another spot.
And in the realm of his question, as an avid kayaker, what would bring them close to town here?
No, I think you're okay anywhere in the harbor. The harbor, you're fine. I think to get into the harbor, first of all, you've got to go into Nantucket Sound, and again, I don't think they like the sound.
So you talked about the acoustic tagging, and that sends out an electronic signal, and I know that sharks use electronic signals to hunt. How do you know it's not interfering or there's not some kind of, you know?
Because of the frequency of the signal. Yeah, it's ultrasonic frequency. So we know that the sharks are not capable of detecting that frequency of a signal. They can detect electricity. So, you know, anytime you put a tag on the shark and it generates any amount of electricity, you could be influencing it. So it's an issue. You know, we all make this broad assumption. You name a researcher to me, and they just will brush that off. That, oh, no, you know, that's nowhere near the ampullae of Lorenzini. It's way back on the shark. The ampullae are around the nose. Ampullae's a near field, you know, less than a meter. It's a near field sense. It's not one that if you're swimming a mile away, I know you're there. So you got to be careful of how electrosensory perceptions actually works in sharks. So we're thinking that if the electrical signal is back there and it's such a low amount of electricity, it's not influencing the shark. You know, has it been definitively proven? No. Has it been proven that our tagging isn't influencing the behavior of the sharks? Like, we always have to think about those things. Researchers don't like to, I'll tell you that, but they have to.
In following O-Search, the tags that you've been putting on, and your sharks, we also noticed that there are sharks being tagged off South Africa.
Right.
Are there other locations in the world where they're tagging, and is there any evidence now that sharks are traveling from transcontinental travels?
Yeah, we have some information, limited data. First of all, those hotspots I showed you, those are all the places where people have been tagging them, filming them, and diving with them. So you name one of those hotspots, South Africa, South Australia, California, Guadalupe Island in Mexico, they've all got, you know, researchers who have been doing quite a bit of work on those animals. And O-Search has been to South Africa and to Guadalupe Island, Mexico, and California to tag fish, as have other colleagues of mine. We have one shark that has moved between South Africa and Australia and back again. That was well documented in a paper published many years ago by Ramon Bonfil and his colleagues that documented that migratory pattern. We haven't seen any other sharks do that. We do have movement between California and Hawaii, but no further than that. So none of these transoceanic stuff except for, none of my fish have gone to the eastern Atlantic, which I would expect, because blue sharks, makos do it. I would expect that white sharks might try to do that, but they don't. Again, they seem to be more coastally oriented, except for those big females.
All right, I think this is the last question that we have. If you guys have any other questions after this, please feel free to come and talk to Dr. Skomal individually.
Thank you. The presentation was wonderful.
Thank you.
But what's the average life expectancy of one of these sharks?
Yeah, I mean, how long do they live? You know, I showed you the dead sharks in the beginning, and that's kind of how I started my research in this field. I looked at dead animals. My entire master's thesis was based on dead blue sharks. And what I did was I went to fishing tournaments like the one at the Anglers Club, like the one in Oak Bluffs, like all the ones in Montauk. And I would take backbones from blue sharks. And then what I determined in my master's thesis was they grow relatively fast. They only live about 16 to 20 years, and they mature about 4 to 5 years old. And that was the basis of my master's work, and it was later published in journal, and now it's the basis for management for blue sharks. So over the course of the last 50 years, we have been able to accumulate over 100 vertebrae from white sharks that have been brought in by various fishermen over the years. And we're just finishing up a study that shows that, not like the blue shark, the white shark grows much, much, much slower, can live over 70 years, and probably doesn't mature until it's 29 or 30 years old. So it's a much different animal. And it makes sense that these large predatory animals, top of the food web type animals, live like that, you know? They're big old, so when I look at large Marge and the fact that she didn't eat, you know, the AUV, the robot, I'm thinking, you know, and you see these scars on her and you go, you know, if you could talk to her, she'd say, yeah, I got that one in 1953, you know. Oh, that thing, it's just a robot, you know, I'm not going to bother. I know what to eat and what not to eat. You know, that's a kayaker. I'm not going to eat the kayaker. Just a kayaker, you know. She's 60 years old, you know, she's seen it all, you know. And so it gives you a different perspective when you look at these videos and you see these white sharks. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you all very much.